Hi, Emma. Good morning.
Good morning. Meeting there.
I assume that's like hello in Cornish. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
We're going to talk a little bit about the Cornish language. I find it fascinating because Cornwall's an area of the UK and it's got a very strong identity, hasn't it? Can you explain a little bit about the Cornish language?
Yeah. So the Cornish language is very similar to the Welsh language, and actually sits linguistically and geographically right between Wales and Brittany. So it's one of the six Celtic languages in the kind of UK area. We're including Brittany in that. So there's Cornish, Breton, and Welsh make up one set of languages, if you like, and then Manx, Scots Gaelic, and Irish Gaelic make up the other set. So very sim. When I say very similar to Welsh, we share some words.
It does look similar when you write the Cornish language down to Welsh, I think.
Yeah, this sounds quite different. There's not quite so much in Cornish, but there are quite a lot of shared words, and the kind of the syntax of the language is similar as well. So you, if I listen to somebody speaking Welsh, I pick up odd words, but I wouldn't understand everything they said.
And at the moment, is there anybody who speaks Cornish in terms of, they've always spoken Cornish, or has it had periods where no one, at least on paper, has been recorded as speaking Cornish?
I suspect that there's never been a time when somebody wasn't speaking Cornish or using Cornish, perhaps not speaking, but writing. So historically, in the kind of 1700s, there's a lady called Dolly Pentreath who's kind of fated to be the last Cornish speaker. But we know that isn't the truth because she was obviously speaking to somebody. And at the time, there were it was recorded there were 4 or 5 other people speaking Cornish in Mosul, where she lived. But nobody really kind of went around Cornwall recording any of that at the time. So we don't really know. But from like that was kind of mid to late 1700s. By the middle of the 1800s, the Cornish language was being revived. So, that's actually quite a short period of time where supposedly nobody was speaking it, although we know some people were speaking it, but it wasn't being used as a community language. It was more, some people used it. So it might have been used by fishermen out on boats, but it wouldn't have been kind of the main language at that point. The main language is English. But since the middle of the 1800s, it's been being revived. So it's kind of, there's not really been much of a time where Cornish wasn't known, if you like, in Cornwall.
And what do Cornish communities, what's their opinion of the Cornish language? Are they in favour of seeing it used more?
Well, I think so. I mean, there's definitely been a shift over the last few years in the attitude towards kind of all things Cornish. So this is just, from my personal kind of life as a child, if the Cornish accent and Cornish people generally thought to be a bit backward, a bit stupid, at the ends of the earth where no technology reaches you, that's if there's a Cornish person on the telly, it was always the figure of fun. But actually, in the last few years, and I think COVID really helped us with this, there's been a massive increase in people making TV programs about Cornwall. And obviously, there's only so much you can go around Cornwall on a train and see all the pretty sights. And so they've kind of actually had to start looking a little bit deeper into what makes Cornwall such a special place. And that's meant they've sort of delved into the language and the culture, and what makes Cornwall Cornwall. And that's been really good for the language because it's actually made it something that is kind of it's okay to to enjoy. I mean, I've been learning Cornish probably for about 20 years on and off. And in that time, there's definitely been a massive increase in the numbers of people learning Cornish. And now if you say I speak Cornish, people don't go, oh, why? They go, oh wow, that's really interesting. So hence I'm talking to you today, because people actually find it quite interesting.
Yeah. I think language is so interesting, and Cornwall is a very special part of the UK. It's got its own flag. It's got a real identity when you go to that part of the country, and I think language is a vital part of that identity. And I think it's great. A lot of people have heard of Welsh and they've heard of Gaelic, but I think some people have heard of Cornish. But I just find it fascinating. You've got this little pocket in the UK that it still survives. What is the plan in terms of promoting Cornish as a language? Do you want to see it on official signs? I'm thinking of what they do in Wales, where you see a lot of translation from English and
Yeah,
Welsh.
yeah. So some of that is already happening. Cornwall Council have a policy that if they replace a road sign, they replace it bilingually. So we're talking about street signs rather than the big ones on the main road.
Yeah.
So if you travel around Cornwall, you'll see lots of street signs with the Cornish translation underneath. And actually, Cornwall Council have a Cornish language officer. So all of the Cornwall Council kind of official things are being gradually translated into Cornish. For instance, when we had the coronation, there was the declarations that were made at that point were all translated into Cornish. So a lot of parish councils, when they did their declarations in the villages, did them in English and Cornish. So we're already kind of seeing some of those official things. I mean, Cornish is recognised as a minority language in the UK, and has been for like the last 20 years. So the UK government doesn't fund it in any way, but Cornwall Council does fund some Cornish language activity. So at the moment, there's a project, kind of an ongoing project, to get Cornish into primary schools. So Cornish is not part of the national curriculum, obviously, and that means that schools are really pushed with time to get everything they have to do. So this is very much a voluntary scheme, and it's an awards system, so bronze, silver, gold. I think at the moment there are about 50 schools signed up to it, which equates to about 4,000 pupils, I think, across Cornwall. So it's a growing number, and the first schools have just achieved their bronze awards. So I think there's 3 or 4 schools that have just achieved bronze award, which is amazing. And I did go to one of the schools recently, and walking around their school, all of their signage is in Cornish. If you say good morning to the children in Cornish, they will reply in Cornish. They know their numbers, their colours, they know all sorts of interesting words. They can sing happy birthday in Cornish. All of those sort of simple things that actually people are using in everyday life. So that is a really, really positive step, because obviously those children will go home and they'll talk to their parents. Oh, we learned this. And it's just hopefully, even if they don't carry it on, because at the moment there is no scheme for secondary schools, it's only primary schools. Even if they don't carry it on now, in the future, if they go back to it, they've got that kind of grounding in Cornish. So yeah, that's a really positive step forward. So that's all funded by Cornwall Council.
Would you like it to be taught as a mandatory part of the syllabus? So you're happy at the moment it's just voluntary?
Oh my God, no! I'd love it to be mandatory. I'd absolutely love it. And there is at the moment a push for a Cornish curriculum, the curriculum Canoic, which would sit alongside the national curriculum, but where there's kind of history, local history, it would be local to Cornwall, and so all the bits where you could kind of have more local emphasis rather than learning about, I don't know, the history of Exeter, they'd be learning about the history of somewhere in Bodmin, maybe. So there is a push, and that would include Cornish language. within it. Again, I think, and I don't know because it's not something that I'm involved with, but I think that again probably would not be mandatory. I think it would have to be something that the schools adopted, but at least it would be a curriculum set out with, kind of all the bits that the government say you have to have.
And just going back to the number of people that speak Cornish at the moment, how many people are we talking, hundreds or thousands, could have a fluent conversation in Cornish?
Okay, so fluent conversation, we're probably talking hundreds. It's really difficult to know because in the last census, for instance, there wasn't a question about like the Cornwall census. There wasn't a question saying, "Can you speak Cornish?" It was, "What is your first language?"
Yeah.
And actually, there's nobody that their first language is Cornish. We're all living in a very Anglo-centric Cornwall. But so last year, 100 people took exams in Cornish, and that's probably the same, similar numbers every year. So there's a exam system which is done by the Cornish Language Board, who are a voluntary organisation. Most stuff that's done in Cornish language is done by volunteers. And there are 4 levels, 4 grades. 4th grade would be kind of equivalent to an A level, maybe first year of university. So last year, I think there were about 20 people that did that exam and passed that exam. And that will be similar to previous years. So, the numbers stack up over the years. And then there are people, obviously, that don't want to do exams and just meet up and chat in Cornish, which there are a lot of. I mean, we have a group in Truro where I live, and we meet up twice a month in the local pub just to speak in Cornish. So there's probably between 8 and 12 of us most weeks.
I suppose that's what that would be fascinating, overhearing someone talking Cornish. Do you ever get any funny looks from people thinking, well, what are they speaking?
I did actually last time we met, I had somebody come up and say, "Oh, are you speaking Cornish?" Yes, we are. And they were like, "Oh, do you mind if I just listen?" No, you carry on. It's odd to be chatting in Cornish in the midst of everybody else is speaking English. But in some ways that's kind of nice because you can just speak quite openly.
I suppose that's the key to the Cornish language becoming more popular, is having the opportunity to speak to other people in Cornish, having those opportunities. Otherwise you like you say, you don't arouse any interest from people who might be interested. You can't practice your pronunciation. So it's I suppose vital that you do have these groups to meet up with.
Yeah. I mean, it is really difficult to learn a language where there is nowhere that you can go where you can be surrounded by it. And if you're learning French, you can just go to France for a week and you'll just hear loads and loads of different people speaking French. All the signs are in French. You can pick up a newspaper, you can do everything is there. Whereas with Cornish, we're constantly having to make our own resources. You're having to find people to speak to. I'm really lucky because my husband speaks Cornish too, so we can talk to each other. But the vast majority of people aren't in that situation. So we do have like weekends where we'll go camping, and then everything is done in Cornish. So you're not allowed to speak English, and that's really good. That kind of immersion.
Can you see the language kind of acting as a bit of a catalyst for more kind of devolution in Cornwall? I mean, would you like to see that happen, or are you happy just that the language is established and used more widely?
I think that the language is part of a much bigger thing, a much bigger kind of cultural identity. There's a huge amount of cultural activity in Cornwall that is very specific to Cornwall, and we kind of sometimes forget that, I think, because it's just here. We don't realise that everybody else isn't doing the same stuff that we're doing until you go somewhere else and think, oh, there's not a shanty singer, shanty group somewhere in a pub tonight. What are you doing? So it's, I think I think devolution, complete devolution, is a fair way off. But I think there is definitely room for more kind of self-governance than we have at the moment. I mean, it's a tricky situation, and there's a lot of people that kind of would take that as, oh, you don't want tourists coming because you don't like people from outside, but you want their money when they come. But in Cornwall at the moment, we're having a massive problem with the cost of housing, and people that work in tourist hotspots not being able to afford to live except in vans, and people being evicted from their homes to turn them into holiday homes, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And it's not just in Cornwall. I know it's happening in a lot of other places, but some of those issues actually, although it's great to have the tourist industry, that can be quite damaging in some places. And that it's interesting because we do have an awful lot of people that move to Cornwall because they have some link with Cornwall. People generally don't just move somewhere just because it's pretty. There's often something more. And so there's an awful lot of people learning Cornish, for instance, that, well, either that don't live in Cornwall. I mean, we've got people learning all around the globe, or that have moved to Cornwall and actually just love it so much that they just really want to be a part of everything Cornish. So, I'm certainly not against people coming to Cornwall ever.
I think it's about getting that balance, isn't it, between going somewhere and assimilating and learning the language, and it's a nice thing to do, but at the same time you don't want complete devolution, because there's good and bad points for both routes, isn't there? Do you find with the Cornish dialect there's regional variations throughout Cornwall, or is it pretty standard?
So, do you mean the Cornish dialect or the Cornish language? Because those are two quite different things.
I was thinking more like the language, and
Okay.
how they pronounce the words. Does it change according to geography?
It does a little bit, although I think that we don't have enough people speaking it to see that variation.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think we will in the future because the numbers are growing all the time. But I think because at the moment a lot of the lessons are online. Actually, following COVID, everything went online, and that's been great in a way. And we knew we had to do that before COVID, but it sort of pushed us to do that. But what that means is that rather than have classes that are geographically located, they're now, I mean, the last class I was in, there was somebody in Scotland, somebody in Russia, somebody in Spain, as well as, I mean, there were only about 3 or 4 people in Cornwall, the rest were around the UK. So you don't get that kind of geographical variances where you everybody kind of adopts something because that's just the way you say it. So I think there probably are, and there are definitely geographical differences to accents. I mean, really, really quite striking. So somebody in Penzance does not speak the same as somebody in Launceston or in Bodmin or in Truro. And that kind of then passes on to the way you speak in Cornish. But yeah, at the moment, everybody's kind of, there are so few of us that you have to mix with everybody.
If somebody's interested in learning Cornish, how can they access these exams? Where's the best place to go to get more information?
Okay, so the best website to look at is a website called Go Cornish, and that's got links to all of the resources that are available to for people to use. There's lots of online resources that are free to use. There's a brilliant course called Say Something in Cornish, which was developed from a course in Welsh called Say Something in Welsh, which is kind of a listen repeat course, and it builds up what you can say really quickly. It's amazing. I think that definitely the first 10 lessons are online, possibly the second course now as well. I haven't used it for a while. But there are apps for your phone. There's all sorts of all sorts of stuff that you can use.
I was on Wikipedia. Is that you talking on Wikipedia about the Cornish language? There's a lady.
I don't think it is. I think it's Elizabeth,
Is
actually, my
it?
friend Elizabeth, I
It,
think.
it's it's fascinating hearing it being spoken though. It's just I find it very interesting, just language in general. But to hear that the
Yeah,
dialect, it's great. Um,
yeah. I mean, it's very different to English. It's
I,
very different.
I think it's nice. I think, difference should be celebrated. I think it makes us stronger as a whole community, as a society, to kind of celebrate it. And it's just great to hear you talk in your native tongue. I think it's important, isn't it, to local communities to have
Yeah,
that identity.
yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, um, it it's crazy because actually, well, it's not crazy. I mean, it's obvious that the Cornish language fits so well with the Cornish accent. Of course it does. But you kind of forget that it would, and it's so easy to say. And actually, there are some absolutely beautiful words in Cornish that we're really missing out from having in English, I think.
Is there?
So can I tell you my favourite
Yeah,
word
no,
in Cornish?
please,
Because it's
please.
just
Give us-
beautiful. It's ticky do, which is butterfly, ticky do, but translated exactly, it means beautiful little thing of God. How
That's
lovely is
it.
that?
It is, yeah. I mean, do you find when there's no words, do you adopt those words from the English language, or does the vocabulary of Cornish have most words there already in one way or
Well,
another?
we obviously, like all languages, we have to come up with words for new things.
Yeah.
Um, and there is a panel of people at the Institute of Cornish Studies that meet and discuss new words. It's not just one person sat somewhere. I'm just looking for my dictionary. I've got a very big dictionary. My dictionary is about this thick, so it's we have a lot of words. A lot of the vocabulary has come from ancient texts.
Mm.
There are the oldest known play that was written in Europe is written in the Cornish language. So there you go.
Yeah.
Beautiful with diagrams showing stage direction, and yeah, amazing. So there's ancient texts that kind of give us a lot of vocabulary, and there has been like kind of some negotiation to know which words we use, because obviously at different points in a language people use different words.
Mm.
So if you think how we speak now compared to how Shakespeare was writing,
Yeah.
it's quite
Yeah.
and every language is the same. It develops, it changes. So obviously reviving a language is quite tricky, because
Yeah.
where do you take the bit you revive? Do you take it from like its heyday? If you
Mm.
say kind of Shakespeare time, it doesn't really fit to modern day.
Yeah.
So there has to be some kind of, obviously there's no word for telephone
Yeah.
um, in the 1700s.
Did you
But
did, sorry, did you say there's a committee that kind of
mm,
make rulings, or kind of, I
yeah,
don't know,
so
decisions?
there's the Institute of Cornish Studies, and they have panels for looking at new words, looking at place names. So a lot of the place names in Cornwall are in Cornish language, and they kind of look to work out what those place names actually mean. A lot of them are kind of descriptive of where they are, um, but that's quite an interesting thing in Cornwall. As soon as you come over the border into Cornwall, the names change completely, um, from the English language to the Cornish language.
What
But that's kind of something that survived, right through. That hasn't gone.
what was that road you said? When we talked on the phone, you said there's a milestone that tells you that you're nearly in Cornwall. The trees
Oh,
on the
there's
road or
yeah,
something.
no, there's the nearly home trees. Yeah, so when you come back to Cornwall, there's a hill, and there's some trees on the top, and it's become quite a thing that when you see those trees, you're nearly there. And then you come over the border and, you know, well, in our car, when we come over the border, we all shout, oggy, 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 oi, oi, oi. And I'm sure we're not the only ones. Which incidentally, oggy, 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 oi, oi, oi translates as pasty, 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 egg, egg, egg.
Okay.
Just so yeah, oi is egg, oggy is pasty.
Is that a Cornish? Is that derived from the Cornish language then? Because I've heard that saying before. Is that
Yeah, well, I
or
mean, in Cornwall it's used a huge amount, so
yeah?
I just assume that everybody everywhere uses oggy, 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 oi, oi, oi. But yes, it is.
I've heard
I
of it.
don't know why it's I don't know why it's pasty and egg. Yeah, but it is it's I mean that, you know, if people in Cornwall say, oh, I don't know any Cornish, then they're lying, because they do know, you know, they don't realize they know Cornish, but they
Yeah.
are using Cornish, things like that, place names. You know, we're using Cornish all the time. We
Mm,
just don't realize, because it's such a part of everyday life.
yeah.
We just don't realize it.
I think that's the fascinating thing about language. You borrow from different languages, and it just becomes part of the natural vernacular. You don't even know you are using it, but
Yeah,
it's derived from a totally different language that's separate, but it just becomes assimilated into your natural language.
yeah.
Emma, it's been fascinating talking to you, and you know, just hearing that. Was it Ollie, 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 oi, oi, oi?
Oggy, 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 oi, oi, oi.
It's worth it for that alone, just to hear you say that. No, it's brilliant.
Well,
Sorry, go on.
Miraz these. Miraz these. Thank you.
No, you're welcome, Miraz Thies. It's no, it's been wonderful. I think it's fascinating, and I hope this helps in some little way, encouraging people to take on Cornish, and you know, for it to continue and just be a successful, you know, and as widespread as it can be.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you. It's great to get the word out there, the words out there.
Thank you. Take care, Emma.
Farewellers. Goodbye.
Bye bye.